Welcome, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Goldstein, president of the Municipal Art Society. Thank you for joining us for this virtual MASterworks conversation celebrating the Far Rockaway Library, MAS's honoree this year for Best New Building. Each year, it's such a joy to celebrate excellence in architecture and urban design across New York City through the MASterworks Awards. Earlier this month, we visited the library for Sunset MASterworks Exploration, which was very special. Today, we'll learn more about how this beautiful building and essential community service resource came to be. Before we begin, I'd like to direct your attention to the chat, where MAS staff has placed some helpful hints, including information about closed captioning for today's program. If you need any assistance during the event, please feel free to message MAS using the chat function, and throughout the event, you can also use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of our speakers. We will answer these questions during the conversation portion of the event. Now a bit more about the Far Rockaway Library. This library is part of the Queens Library System, serving the Far Rockaway community. In the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, the original Far Rockaway building library provided vital disaster relief for local residents. With the design of the new building, Queens Public Library and the designers aim to provide an inviting space for learning, reading, and community. And as we'll learn today, the library has successfully accomplished these goals with a beautiful new building. To speak about the project, we're joined by Craig Dykers from Snøhetta, the design team behind the project, and artist Jose Parla, whose artwork is an integral part of the building's design. I'm very happy to introduce them both now. Craig Dykers is the founding partner architect at Snøhetta, a transdisciplinary, dialogue-driven practice that includes architecture, landscape architecture, interior architecture, and more. Jose Parla is a Brooklyn-based contemporary artist who's collaborated with Snøhetta on this library. His 2022 style writing wraps around the building's facade. See more about Jose's artwork in the link in the chat. To start things off, Craig and Jose will share some slides to provide context about the project. Then I'll come back to the screen for a conversation with both of them. We'll close things out with audience Q&A, so don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom. Please, Jose and Craig, I look forward to your discussion. Take it away.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. Jose and I are going to have a brief sort of description about our thoughts for the project, and it shouldn't take more than about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to start to share my screen, and we'll both be talking along the way. So let's see if we can get this set up. We call the project, in addition to the Far Rockaway Library, we also call it the Writers' Library, which has a lot to do with the expression of the building. And Jose will talk briefly about that, I'm sure, as he talks about his work on the project. Far Rockaway is a part of the city that many people don't often visit. You may have heard of the Rockaways, which are the beaches. Far Rockaway is a little further inland, closer to the where the peninsula meets Long Island. It's quite far from Manhattan, so if any of you have ever driven from Manhattan to, say, JFK, add another 30 minutes to your trip, and that will tell you how distant it is from most places that we ordinarily see when we live in the center of the city. It's a place that is not so easily reached. There is a subway and a ferry system now that helps connect it. But it's been a place that in recent years has sort of been off the radar. In the past, it's not the case. It used to be one of the jewels of New York City. Before air conditioning, Far Rockaway was the place where people in Manhattan went to escape in the hot days of the summer. And in fact, most of the Broadway theater venues had their second home in Far Rockaway, near to the site where we're working. The project was always meant to be something bright and lively and bold. We always wanted it to be something that would bring not only a sense of hope, but a sense of joy to this part of the city, which had been under-resourced for many years since the time of the urban planning process that Moses had put into place in the 50s. So there's something about bringing energy to this environment that really drove us. The area has suffered greatly over the last decades. You wouldn't know it, but in the 1950s, the local high school created or had 5 Nobel Prize winners who graduated from the local high school, including Richard Feynman, famous physicist. But since that time, it has gradually lost some of its power as a part of the city. But the people there are very proud. They're proud of where they live. They enjoy where they live. And even if it floods and has tremendous challenges to how you live there, they're working every day to ensure that it becomes an important home for those citizens that live there and nearby and visit. There was at this particular location a beautiful Carnegie Library that existed until the 60s, and then it mysteriously, in quotes, burned down. No one knows exactly why or how it burned down. It's a mystery still, but it was an unfortunate event. A rather difficult sort of modernist, monolithic brutalist library was built in its place. The most interesting thing perhaps about it, besides the fact that it didn't really have any windows, was that it had a garden on the corner, but that garden was then locked up behind a kind of jail cell, so nobody could use that garden. In some ways, the feeling was it needed to be protected so that you couldn't use it. It just represented a negative kind of commentary on the community. So we wanted to erase all of these associations, the fires, the kind of brutalist feeling that was there, and give people a feeling of openness and access. The way we wanted to do that was through light, natural light first. We knew that daylight, natural light could be work in two directions. One, to focus your feeling about the world around you and the sky above you, but also so that the building became a kind of lighthouse that projected outwards to the citizens that would use it. So somehow natural light should play a strong role, whether it was how the art represents itself or how the building represents itself. And that became intriguing to us. We started making some sort of little crystalline studies, and the building was very simple in plan. And there were several components that we thought could focus light into the interior from an architectural perspective. And that seemed to be very interesting. And as we moved the project further, we created these rather unusual skylights that are designed in such a way to be almost kaleidoscopic. They bring light in different ways down into the space below. They're joyful in terms of color, and they always have a changing kind of quality as the sun moves through them throughout the day. Here's another view. It's a sort of origami system. They're sort of folded into place, and they have a two-layer paint on them that changes color depending on the angle of the sun. There's no electricity involved in all of these components. They're all using ambient light and natural light. What's rather impressive about all of that light is that it moves through another series of spaces, including a set of handrails that are using a type of dichroic glass, which is a prism type glass along the mezzanine level that moves the light in even more directions. And then finally, as you'll see in just a moment when Jose starts to talk about his work, through the facade, and gives you a different sense of light coming in from the side. So there's just light everywhere, and it's always changing. And we think that's an important part of giving people a sense of pride and ownership in their space. Here's another view from the mezzanine level looking down to the main entry lobbies, and this sort of prismatic handrail with the main facade in the distance. Many people, when they see this building first time from the exterior, they think that it's metal or solid, but it's not. It's actually a glass system, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Before we do, though, we wanted to say that it seems like the people that are in the building when they use it, so far as we've gotten to know them, just feel lively when they're in there. They're happy. There's a sort of sense of joy that we think is a very key component of this design. And they take ownership over the space. They feel proud that it's theirs. And as the light moves through these various layers of the facade and the prismatic handrails, a very unusual thing begins to happen. you see, oops, sorry, you get to see these rather unusual light sort of images that occur through the skylight and through the glass pieces, and these change as the sun moves. We knew that this might happen, but we didn't know the extent to which it would happen. And we've been there at different times of the day. They might be there only for an hour, and then they disappear when the sun moves away from the skylights. But we're almost certain that in the future, people will begin to want to be there just to see this kaleidoscope of light coming through the ceiling and through the side of the building, through the facade. We began to talk a lot early on, very early, and I want to, before I introduce Jose, say that Jose was an integral part of the entire project. So this was not something that was an afterthought. He was also a part of these original conceptual discussions, and we tried to figure out how the architecture could represent his thinking that would help ground us in the place that we were and his understanding of the places he's lived in New York City. And we were really fortunate to work with him in many types of projects, including his studio in Brooklyn, and worked with him on a library in North Carolina and other things. So Jose, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Thank you to MASterworks Conversations and to everyone who has joined us for this conversation. Craig and I met over 20 years ago in a really enthusiastic conversation that we were both invited to be present as speakers. And when I saw Craig's presentation, I was completely floored. I was blown away and inspired all at the same time. We became friends, and Craig invited me to the Snøhetta studio to come look at some of the projects they had done, like the Biblioteca Alexandrina in Alexandria, Egypt. And then we started to talk about what project they were doing with the James B. Hunt Library at the university, at the North Carolina State University. You can see here on the upper left corner, a painting that I'm working on there at the library for a project that we called The Nature of Language. That was really inspiring also to talk about what kind of work I would be creating in collaboration with Snøhetta for the Far Rockaway Library, because we always think about language as another form of light and enlightenment. And I wanted to always create a language that, when visible as a gestural form of art, it could resemble many languages from around the world, so that no matter where you're from, what language you speak or you write, you can possibly imagine this painting or this work of art in the library as your own language. So therefore, it's like you're mirroring, as a viewer, as a visitor, you're mirroring yourself. You're part of the building now. We thought of many ideas on how to approach it, this collaboration. And going back to what Craig was speaking about, using natural light, I was so inspired by that because I love the idea of the writing itself being transparent, and that the color of light that we imagined with sunrises and sunsets could have this translucency of these light yellows to oranges, but at the same time be transparent during the day, and at night be illumined from within, so that the light also peers and peeks out through the artwork onto the street, onto the city. Making art for the public has always been a part of my practice. And I love the idea that, you know, in a neighborhood so sort of far removed by distance from the center of New York City, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and some of the other centers far away from the museums, that every day, everyone in that neighborhood, on their way to school, on their way to work, that they are in front of a piece of art, and that starts a conversation about art early on in their day, or even in their lives when they're very little, growing up around this library. We were there for the opening day, and we just saw the magnetism and the energy and the joy that it brought to the neighborhood. So that makes us feel like we've done a really great work together here. The inspiration behind the work comes from my early experience as an artist in the 1980s and 90s, painting on walls, part of a movement that is known as writing. We call ourselves writers, and it was started in Philadelphia and New York, mainly on the subway trains and in walls throughout the city. Since the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it really became an international movement with youth sort of spreading this art throughout cities around the world. In my own personal journey, and after studying painting at school, I combined some of the elements of the writing into my abstract expressionistic painting work. That work also resembles a lot of the layering that I see that happens on walls throughout cities. In New York, when you're on a subway station or you're walking down the street, you may see advertisement that has been layered for months, sometimes years, and now it's dilapidated and sort of shedding its skin and revealing the history of the wall itself, which in a psychogeographic way reveal a lot about the neighborhood. And in painting, I was always concerned with the kind of neighborhoods that I was interested in depicting, because it was the type of neighborhood where there's working class people, like Far Rockaway, parts of the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and even lower and upper Manhattan, and in between, you have a kind of energy, a synergy that really is this urban fiber, this weaving of inner city culture that I felt was really necessary to represent in the artwork through contemporary art. The library itself is a reflection of this futuristic collaboration. Again, it's a huge honor to work with Snøhetta and the brilliant minds there that come up with such ideas where, you're combining world-class architecture and technology, but also the very everyday elements of light and sun and the way that wind also moves clouds above the sun and changes light. And therefore, the building being a breathing, living, energetic building. So the writing itself goes back to this culture of the streets. And I thought it was a real interesting way to title the work, style writing, and that the library itself can have a subtitle, a writer's library. Writing for several reasons, writing for literature and history, but writing in the real pure sense of the street culture of writing on walls. That writing element, that calligraphic element, to me, is as important as looking at ancient cultures that you can see in Japan, the Middle East, in England, see these beautiful calligraphies. And now we look back and study that as a part of human mark making and human language. I think when we look back at the components of this hemisphere in the American culture, and we look back in time, we might arrive at the idea that American writing and calligraphy, that style of calligraphy was born in the streets and in the ghettos of the American cities like New York City and Philadelphia, Miami, where I'm from. And so there's this dialogue that is happening with youth culture and the very facade of the building at the Far Rockaway Library. Here, you can see an image of my project titled It's Yours at the Bronx Museum of Art in the Bronx, New York, where I collaborated with Snøhetta for the design of the exhibition and also on vitrines and chairs and stools that are interchangeable, that you can move into clusters and sit as a group or sit by yourself and study. So this is also part of the kind of library study idea that we've worked on together with Snøhetta that was already fueling a lot of the ideas for the Far Rockaway Library. Here's a picture of one of the stools.
Sorry.
And an image of, it's fine. And also an image coming up of the close-up of nature of language, which you can see almost as a landscape or an ocean of language, of all the world's languages mixing together. And so, again, the work on the library itself at the Far Rockaway Library comes from these components, this idea of storytelling, layering the storytelling in a form that is gestural. You could see in this movement, there's a kind of a body dance that is combined into the lyrical calligraphic movement. I feel that, you know, working on that scale and large scale structures really connects to the human body in a way that even if you're not an artist or a painter like myself, you can kind of trace some of the lines and feel that it belongs to you as if it's your own signature on the building. Here is one of the original sketches that I used to study and then used later on for the scanning of what would become the story and the writing for a writer's library in Far Rockaway. I paid homage to the neighborhood by using stories from the neighborhood and also names of artists, scientists, literary artists, subway artists like Rommel C. and Sonic, who are from Far Rockaway. So there's a lot of interwoven secret stories that are in this in the facade of this building.
Yeah, and this is the end result. And as Jose mentioned, it had to be scanned. This is a very quite large facade. He couldn't work at full scale. It would simply be impossible. So he had to work at a scale that felt comfortable for his movement. But we had to translate it, and there was an enormous effort to figure out how to translate that onto the glass. So this is a fritted kind of technology. So it's a print it's somewhat like a print onto glass. But when you expand the original sketch to this size, it became very pixelated. It got very muddy. There were so many technical problems. It took nearly a year to sort out those technical problems together with those that are manufacturing the frit and the glass and those that wanted to see it as a representation of the original sketch. So it became this rather bizarre balance of technical needs and artistic gesture. And as you see, yeah.
What I love about it is that you could see from these pictures almost like if it's a flat image, but when you get up close, you see right through it into the building. So it's completely transparent. And when you're inside the building, you can see people walking outside. You see the buildings and the street through the artwork. So it's a real technological feat. And I'm just super pleased with how it turned out.
And, you know, it works in two directions. So in the daytime, like this, it's harder to see inside, which, by the way, was useful for the people inside. They didn't want to be too exposed on that intersection. So it helped make them feel safe. And at night, though, when it's lighter inside than outside, you see the other direction. You can see in, and in the day you can see out. And that's a surprise to most people. And they enjoy that kind of bit of surprise. And we're just going to conclude with a few more images. This is when you're seeing less of the outside from a distance away, and you're just getting the feeling that you're living inside an artwork that feels like it belongs to the street. Sometimes you see the surrounding buildings coming in to you, so you understand the context. It's not segregated from the world around it. It's connecting to it, even though it's so unique. Very quickly, just to round it out, the colors were quite difficult to understand what they should be. There were many people that said, well, you can't use this color or that color because certain people in the community either don't like it or they feel it's theirs. We were inspired by photographs from an artist named Eric Cahan, who had these pictures of Far Rockaway Beach looking out across the Atlantic at sunrise. And, you know, if you live out there, there are colors that you can only see at this part of the Rockaways. You don't see them in Manhattan. The way the sun rises up over the Atlantic is a unique event. And so we started to interpolate that and build that in to some of the parts of the building, not only for the areas where Jose was working, but for some of the solid portions of the facade. And as was mentioned earlier by Jose at the opening, people have already begun to embrace it. Before it even opened, people were trying to break into the building to use it because they couldn't wait. So it's been quite exciting to see. And I'll just conclude with this last picture to show that urbanism And urban space isn't only about making spaces and plazas and parks and things like that. Urbanism is also about the way in which a building represents itself to its urban surroundings. So here, the building becomes urban, although it's not a space. And it builds its own space. And I think it works that way because if we were only working as architects, we could never have built the kind of subtlety that the artist has developed here with the building. In my opinion, it would never have been as successful as it is. And that collaboration, we think, is important for many architects to recognize. And I think we're finished.
Great, thank you very much. And first, enormous congratulations for the MASterworks Awards. And thank you for this wonderful presentation. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the other kinds of collaborations that you've had with other artists, Craig, on other buildings. And you've talked a lot about how this collaboration happened, but I imagine that you've worked with other artists in other circumstances. I'm just curious how different that was.
Well, this project was a very intimate relationship, and but it is like other projects we've worked on. And our first significant project was the Library of Alexandria in Egypt that Jose mentioned. And that began with an artist, Jordan Sanes, who worked with us to develop the language on the exterior of that building that was similarly inspired by our history of communication. And then I would say beyond that, we've worked with about 200 artists throughout our 35 years. And it's been a part of who we are. We always feel that we learn so much from working with artists. Everyone says, oh, architecture, art, architecture is an art or whatever. They're not the same, they're related. But the mind of an artist and the mind of an architect or landscape architect are very different. And I feel that our work has always grown as a part of that collaboration.
Jose, can you talk a little bit about other projects with other firms that you've worked on? You've done other public work, obviously, and you've talked very eloquently about the origins of your public work, but I'm curious about how this relationship has been different from maybe other collaborations that you've had.
Well, some of the other public works that I've done, like at the Brooklyn Academy of Music or One World Trade Center, Barclays Center, they were not in collaboration with the architects. It was usually an afterthought that happened with the developers, and the building designs had already existed. And so the artist myself, I was reached to sort of come and work on murals and existing ideas. And sometimes they were very open-minded that I could expand the possibility of where the mural could be, how big it could be, maybe even change its location to have a bit of more approachability from the public. The difference with Snøhetta is in working with Snøhetta, they put the artist at the very front of the design of the collaboration. It's not an afterthought, like Craig said. So it's very much from the inception of the project. And even sometimes Craig and the team at Snøhetta have come to me and said, let's pitch a project together that doesn't even exist, or collaborate in that way, like imagine new possibilities and new ideas. So it's a really important distinction, and I think a really healthy way to look at art, public art, and architecture, and also really just facilitating language and understanding in the arts for the public.
I mean, in a way, you can say it's very, very old school. This
Yeah.
is the way historically architects used to work with artists and vice versa. And then they became segregated and categorized and sort of separated from interactions. And I think we're trying to build back that subtlety that used to exist centuries ago.
Well, I'm curious, Craig, you've obviously worked on other projects in New York and other cities, projects where you have a percent for art component, and you did in this building, as well as Jose's much deeper collaboration. And I'm just curious from your perspective as an architect, how those have worked or what the challenges have been.
The main challenge is that what I just alluded to, people don't see how the two can work together because it's very uncommon now. So clients often don't want to sort of make a contract that involves everybody. Even the Far Rockaway Library was not accepted our proposal to work with Jose. There were other artists that worked in the building in the part of the 1% for Art, but we had to build that out of our personal contract in order to get him to be involved so directly as it were. Today, the percent for art often suggests there's an architecture thing and there's an art thing, and you get the money for the art thing and it gets in fact applied, as Jose said. It's very hard for people to wrap their head around two people working so closely together. So many of our contracts stumble at that point with the clients, and they don't want to really, they feel they're paying too much, or I don't know what it is. But I think over time, people are recognizing the value of artists and architects working together in the same way they recognize how landscape architects can also lead architecture. You know, architects have been at this kind of power position for so long, and it's been so hard for landscape architects to get around that because of the kind of political problems. But people are starting to see that, you know, things can be different. Landscape architects, artists can lead a discussion, and the architect can facilitate. This doesn't mean that I don't think my profession is, you know, important. Of course it is. But I just think we need to have a softer, more nuanced approach than, I guess I like to say, it's the election coming soon. I'm in favor of breaking down the borders.
Yeah.
Thank you for those thoughts. It's super helpful. Jose, did you want to add anything before I go on?
Yeah, I just think, you know, in collaboration with Craig, is that we sometimes encounter a bureaucratic power that eliminates some of the potential for growth in the artistic process. I think there's a built-in fear that if too much freedom is allowed for the arts to combine and communicate, that maybe something dangerous will happen. But I think the opposite would happen. Something beautiful would flourish. And so all I'd like to add is that if there are people listening or people that want to study what we've done with the Far Rockaway Library and see it as an example of how a pure collaboration can really function best for the community, that really it's the people in the community who are going to really enjoy it, because all the bureaucrats won't live in that community. They're, you know, over in City Hall, they're in Manhattan. They're not day to day enjoying that library. So I think the arts and that very pure element of collaboration comes from a good place. It comes from the heart of, you know, the creative architects and not just me, Jose Parla, as an artist, but artists in general. What we do is we work really hard. We think every day of how we can make the world a better place. And like my professor Mel Alexenberg used to say, collaboration is the future of the world.
That is a lovely sentiment. So I want to talk about another aspect of the collaboration, and that is with the library system itself and the functionality of the building. And obviously you've created just a very warm and welcoming space, but I'm curious about how you collaborated with the actual folks in that branch of the library and talked about what they wanted and needed in terms of functional spaces and what they brought to the collaboration in terms of their ideals and desires. Because they've been in a pretty awful place for a long time.
Yeah, our main focus in those discussions was with the Queens Public Library System, who were just magnificent. And also, by the way, who knew Jose's work and were incredibly supportive. So, you know, there's nothing that you can say that would suggest they weren't supportive of any part of the project. They really were. As a user group, they helped us understand some of the needs of their library system as we were working. But when we started the project, before we had the commission, you know, I went out there, personally, all alone on a hot day, and embarrassed myself asking people what they thought about a new library there. And you got it straight from the people that live there what they wanted, and the answers were exceptional, a wide range of things from rather rational things to rather unusual and somewhat embarrassing things that they would talk about, which I won't repeat. But it was hard for them to use that library that was there, and they said the things that fulfilled their dream and vision for the future. And so we use that to guide us, and I think that's one of the reasons why it seemed made perfect sense to talk to Jose, who knows how people move through their lives in a way that is connected to their surroundings every day, as opposed to getting in a car or flying in a helicopter everywhere you go. They in a sense, just live in their surroundings as if they're having a meal every day. And so they talked about it in very direct sense. So that was one way we worked with it. Then, of course, throughout the project, we integrated with the Queens Library System to find out some of the needs for teens, and how much of the building would be used for a safety zone during the event of a hurricane or some other kind of emergency. It offers a huge amount of resources for people who may not have those resources at home. We talked to a great many high school students who said this was like their home. The library would be their home. When they study, they may not have space at home to study, or it may be too loud. The amount of functions that building serves is enormous. And so you really, calling it a library is important, but don't limit it to thinking it's only about checking out a book.
Yeah, yeah. And to add to that, it is a library, it's a community center, and it's also now an international destination. I've had people write to us and ask, when they come to New York, can they go see it? Can they go and visit it? And so there's a lot of interest that what I think spread from the library into the community, where people will learn about Far Rockaway, because the library is bringing a component that is, world-class architecture, and also a communication and art that does have a connection to international communities as well.
Absolutely. So I'm curious to talk more specifically about some of the design decisions around the teen room, for instance, and obviously that garden that had been behind a fence is now actually a usable space in the library. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of those decisions, both from a design and also functional perspective.
Well, for those of you who might have children or teenage children, there is a little bit of a challenge about teens not wanting to be too close to toddlers, and they don't want to feel like kids. They like to feel like adults and be served as not in a ghetto. That was driving our thinking, and we placed the teen area easy to have easy access at the ground level. But it also has a kind of glass wall that helps it have its privacy. It looks out onto the street, so you feel like you're a part of the street life, but the fritted pattern on the glass gives them a degree of privacy. And there are remaining security concerns in the area. It's a safer place than it used to be, but we do have to worry, not just in the Far Rockaway, but really all across this country, about gun ownership and what can happen to people as they might be thinking they're safe in a communal environment. And so the pattern helps at least screen them a bit. Then the children's area is located on another level, so they don't have to feel they're having to navigate past a toddler to get to their teen room. Plus, parents can feel a little more safe for their toddlers on the upper floor, which is where the community rooms are and some adult activities. The books are primarily on the upper levels. So that's where many people go. There are many other things than books. There's computer access and so on. And the garden, as you mentioned, was placed to the rear of the building rather than the front. So it could be completely open to the sky, and you can access it through the library. So it has a degree of security that the fence used to provide. Now we don't need a fence. At least you don't have to walk through a gate to get into the garden. You just walk through the library and out a door. And it's a pleasant place for both the staff and the people that are using the building.
I'm curious about the public nature of this project. I know, Craig, you've worked on many private projects as well as public ones, and Jose, you've done the same. And I'm curious about the differences in process, in goals, and so on, about, you know, this sense that it's hard to work with the public sector. Obviously, it achieves something really different that plays a different role in the community, but I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about what the differences are and what it's like to be working on both sides of the marketplace.
Why don't you start, Jose, about your different types of clients versus this type of clients?
Sure. You know, mainly in the art studio, I have a lot of freedom to paint what I really feel, and what I'm experiencing in life translates onto the canvas, onto mural. And so, you know, I exhibit in galleries and museums. And so that is just completely me. There is very little client involvement. There are clients that commission me for murals that say, you know, please do you have complete freedom. We trust you. And that surprises me most of the time, because when there are teams involved of people, there are a lot of ideas that are kind of being inputted. And there's usually a kind of project leader that tries to limit too many ideas, like what colors to use, what not to use. Sometimes when it's a very public space, they want to be very clear that there's nothing political. And obviously, because it's an abstract work, that there's a kind of already understanding that is that way. But there has been sometimes limitations when there's like interviews or video that's being done. They kind of send you a script of what they expect. And, you know, so there's a lot of things that people are being careful about these days when it comes to the public sector. When it comes to museums and galleries, you get a little bit more freedom, of course. And then obviously working with a project like Snøhetta, it's the dream project for me, because it comes from a really healthy place. And we're really concerned with doing the best projects for the you know, community. What's different for me between, you know, let's say the Far Rockaway Library or the North Carolina State University is that the university, it was an indoor mural. It is not a, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not a public space in the sense that it's on the street and it's visible to the whole world. You have to go through security into the library to see it. I think you can easily access the building, but you know, it's not as public. So there weren't a lot of the same concerns. But I think just, you know, Craig's experience working with clients versus mine deal with so many dynamics that are different that he can go into with safety, with insurances, with, you know, height levels, with even staircases. Everything is so different than it is for me. And Craig could take it from there.
You know, I would say, and I want to preface my answer by saying there are a great many architects who I love their work, but who are primarily building their practice around control and perfection. And they make beautiful things. There's no question. My personal reason for becoming an architect was not about that. It was about the messiness of life. Life is messy. I'm sorry, but you can try and button your thing all the way up and it's still going to be messy. And that messiness is something that I feel we need to embrace. And we need to not step back and say, well, this client is trying to tell me what to do, or this community is trying to control what I'm trying to do. As an architect, in my opinion, you have to embrace that kind of nuance. That means that sometimes the buildings don't always turn out exactly the way you want. And the strange thing is that doesn't mean it's not going to be successful. And as far as I'm concerned, if the people that are using it love it, want to be there, protect it even. I mean, people will protect our buildings. because they feel it's theirs, not because they feel it's ours. And if we can build that, then it's okay that maybe the screw heads are not exactly all lined up, or the, you know, the exact grain of wood is not perfect, or these things. The world we live in is not the same as the world of 200 years ago, where you could use cheap labor all over the place to build temples of godliness. We have to see that society is more complicated than that. And the best we can do is make it better no matter what messiness throws itself at us. And that's why we take on a lot of projects. The Rockaway Library is a great example. Most people would have walked away from that because they thought, well, we'll never get what we want, and the city is like problematic and all of these things, but we stuck to it. And you know, that community is now has a building that could feel right at home in the center of Paris, you know, but it's in Far Rockaway.
Yeah. Well, that is incredible tribute to the two of you and your teams, and also the city's willingness to engage, and the Queens Public Library. Obviously, we've come out the other side with something extraordinary. I want to turn to some of our audience questions, and if anyone has others, please add them to the Q&A. One of our viewers is asking a question about what you're hearing, what kind of feedback you're hearing from library users. They think designing a library must be an incredibly rewarding experience as you're building a space for the community to learn, read, and grow, and interested in the positive feedback you're hearing from users.
Well, one thing I found is that most of us think about the function of a library as its interior contents. And of course, that's very important. You know, if it can't serve its users inside, then it's not really doing its job. However, with this project, it's a part of the imagination of the communities, even if they're not inside of it. So the library serves a purpose as a beacon for this small and often under-resourced community. And we're hearing all the time that people feel proud of just it sitting there, even if they don't go inside. And sometimes what's great about some of these buildings is that the design is actually, in quotes, pretty cool. It's a cool looking building, right? So it's going to attract the artwork, and the shape and the light is going to attract young people to it that they might not have gone to if it were a more sober, sedate, architectonic typology of a library with all the cool, you know, the formal moves that architects make. And I think the work that Jose has done has drawn people to it in even more sophisticated ways.
Jose, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I just to add, a lot of the friends that I know in the art community really see it as a kind of a, you know, a next evolution of the art form that started in the 70s. A lot of the artists see it as an homage to all of the years and all of the hardships that community went through to be accepted in the arts. And so it also serves as a beacon for a large community, not only in New York, but now that it's getting around, you know, and people are aware of its existence, people see it as a place that really has taken the entire community up another level, you know, and it's, you know, a lot like what Craig said, like people are drawn to it. People know that it's an artwork and an architect for the people, you know, and so that is just, there's nothing more that we could ask for. It's, you know, something we had a feeling would happen, and we worked really hard to make it very inclusive in a time where inclusion is the most important. And I think we've gone beyond that because, you know, Far Rockaway and the art form itself that I speak of, it was always an art form that was in the fringes of society, you know, and now to be at this, you know, juncture in history with such a profound, beautiful, cool building, like, you know, quote unquote, it resonates with the times. It's really an invitation for people to be near it, to come to it, to be inside. So that's the vibe that's the vibe out there. That's the word of mouth.
And you know, it's for us exciting because we also just finished off 550 Madison, which is a part of the MAS Awards too. And that's another kind of different type of place that draws people together. Someone said to me the other day, we're the kind of architects that don't shy away from making people comfortable and happy.
Yeah.
That's a lovely statement.
Uh,
I'm gonna share one of our other comments and questions for you. Someone writes, I'm working on a doctoral thesis in architecture focusing on public libraries after the digitization crisis and the new roles that libraries now fulfill. It's a pleasure to hear from you both. I have a very general but profound question for you, Jose and Craig. With your extensive experience in libraries around the world, what do you think is the next step in public library design in the 21st century? Thank you in advance.
I can say one thing. Everyone asks, what's the library of the future? And my first response is every library throughout time has always been the library of the future. There has never been a library of the past. All libraries are looking to the future. They're not archives. There's a separate thing. You build an archive, you store stuff in it, and it's about the past, but you leave it there and you protect it. A library is a place about interaction. And the other thing I like to say is that libraries have never been about books either. The first libraries had no books. Books weren't invented until 1,000 years or more after the first libraries were built in the West. So there was use of word of mouth in libraries. There were use of scriptures and scrolls. Then books came. And nobody said when Gutenberg created the first printed book, oh, I guess libraries are over. Nobody's going to talk to each other anymore. They just became something else. And then now we see digital revolution that changes how we access knowledge. But I will say this, whatever a library has been, from the time before scrolls to the time after books, it's always been about human interaction, getting people together to deal with each other, surrounded by knowledge and having access to knowledge that sometimes the internet can't guide you to, because librarians are skilled in allowing you to understand which knowledge is useful and which is misinformation, which is why libraries are more under fire today, not because of the digital revolution, but because of people recognizing that if they can control a library, they have a power over dissemination of knowledge, which is ultimately the thing that is most troublesome for certain types of society who want to control people. If people can control themselves, it's harder for other people to control them. And libraries are now representing that component of society more and more, and especially in a place like Rockaway.
Well, to follow up on that is pretty difficult because Craig's saying all. But, you know, going back to the system that I grew up in as an artist is from the fringes, we created a movement, a youth movement that was radical, that was always about the future. And to talk about the future, I have to say that one of the artists that visited with us on the opening day of the Far Rockaway Library was artist Futura 2000. His name says it all. He's an artist that was a mentor to me, a fantastic forward thinking in the movement, who was always thinking about the future. And, you know, to echo what Craig is talking about is that the library that we designed together is not just quote unquote a library. It's a cultural center. And that when you have a library that is a cultural center and you design around contemporary culture, that contemporary ideals are constantly thinking about dealing with the next step forward, how to grow, how to make society better. And so libraries are constantly about the future because of that. And this is a perfect example because, you know, Craig and Snøhetta welcomed me, allowed me to have so much freedom and so much conversation and so much collaboration that it brought something so organic that is about the people, that is about the masses and the language of today. And, you know, that's the future of libraries and spaces that are about communication.
Just a personal observation here that I grew up in the Bronx and grew
Oh,
up
yeah.
just at the time you're talking about, Jose, and experienced the art on the subway as it began to evolve.
Wow.
So I'm very moved by your connections to that, both that art form, but also being on the outside, but also the level of surprise that happened with that art. You know, the fact that you stumble on it, you don't expect to see it, you don't expect it to manifest in the way that it does. So that brings me actually to another question that I had, which it kind of also comes from something that you said, Craig, about seeing the way the light ends up on the floor in the building. I'm curious, what are the surprises for you? Obviously, you worked very collaboratively. It's a design, right? You thought through many, 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 many elements of it. But are there aspects of the building in its living form now that surprised you?
Well, personally, and I often say this, any architect who tells you they know what something is in their head, they know exactly what it's going to look like when it's built, is not telling the truth. You can never fully imagine the magnitude or the scale of things, whether it's very, very small or very, very large. We knew this was going to be impactful because it's a monolithic, simple form in a place with a lot of visual cacophony. So we knew that was going to be there. And we knew that Jose's work was going to be exceptional and was going to be quite powerful. It has a presence. But I never imagined how much. It's just more than, you know, your brain can only do so much before it's actually there. And when you see it there, it's more than you thought, and it doesn't get smaller. Which, you know, I lived near the pyramids in Egypt for a while, and that was the thing about the pyramids. You'd go out there and you'd step out of a car or get off a camel, and you'd see these things, and my God, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen in my. How could they have done this? After about 30 minutes, they start to get smaller. They get tinier and tinier and tinier. You just get used to them somehow, and your brain changes it to a smaller object. But this building doesn't. That it doesn't diminish. The color, and because of the light, the way the light hits it, and you know, painting. Lots of people think painting is just paint on a canvas. It's not. It's paint on a canvas with light. You can't have a painting without light. And
Yeah.
natural light is the thing that really makes older paintings that were painted with natural light. And Jose paints with natural light too. You know, that makes them stronger. And I think that this, as a result, grows. It doesn't get smaller or sillier or goofy over time.
Yeah, you know, it's metaphorically, when I think about painting through the technique of chiaroscuro, you're bringing light to darkness. You're bringing light to the world. It's a sunrise. It's a constant sunrise of ideas. And this building is glowing, and it keeps expanding. You know, touching back on the hardships, you know, growing up in the Bronx, you saw that a lot of the arts funding was taken out of the public school system. New York City was, you know, bankrupt in the 1970s and 80s for a very long time. It was struggling. And it's just a wonder that young people took it upon themselves to make art when they could have done all kinds of other things and get into just trouble. The arts changed so many lives. So symbolically, this building connects to this beautiful struggle that is representative of New York City. And so as much as it is about Far Rockaway, it's about New York City and inner cities struggles like it. And there's a pure light that comes from the youth. And we really hope that it keeps generating inspiration for all kinds of people that come to the library.
Well, I'm going to use this soapbox just briefly to say administrations now and in the future, don't let your finger off the button, because there's pressure to look away from these things because they don't provide the same kind of direct income that other decisions in public policy might make. And there's big, big money in New York. And this is not big money. On the other hand, it has prompted a whole new series of new housing developments, both affordable and rental and housing for sale. So that community has increased its economy that it wouldn't have had if the city didn't choose way back under Bloomberg to create something they knew would be a powerful new element in an area that was forgotten. But believe me, I've been doing this for too long. The people will just push it to the side at some point, and political pressures will have them stop thinking about these kinds of projects again.
Sadly.
I hate to stop this conversation, which has been totally fascinating. I'm sure we could talk for several hours more, and your admonition to action, Craig, is well taken. As a closing comment, thank you to both of you for the wonderful presentation and all of your insightful comments. I also want to thank the MAS staff who helped coordinate today's program. We hope that you'll join us for a future event. By all means, take a look at our programs and tours calendar on our website. Thank you to all of you who joined us this afternoon. Special thanks to MAS members. If you're not a member and enjoyed today's programs, we hope that you will consider joining. Your membership helps to support make MAS do programs and advocacy towards a more livable city possible. Please see the chat for more information about how to support MAS. Once again, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you have a fabulous weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.